The Iron Code, Rise, Episode 1, The Girl Who Listened to Machines. Jorvia was a city that did not care for the weak. It was a place where power belonged to those who had the means to take it. Politicians, corporate overlords, and the ruthless gangs that controlled the underbelly. The poor, like Zaya, were just shadows in the alleys, surviving on the scraps left behind. Zaya had never been to school. Not because she didn't want to, but because life had stolen the chance from her. At the age of 5, she lost her mother to an infection that could have been cured with medicine they could never afford. At 10, she lost her home to a fire that reduced everything to ashes and left her father blind. He was once a strong man, a machinist in the lower districts, but after the accident, he became a shell of himself, relying on his daughter for survival. So Zaya did what she had to do. Every day, she scavenged the junkyards and back alleys of Jorvia, collecting scraps of metal and discarded tech parts. It wasn't glamorous, but it put food on the table. What set her apart from the other scavengers, though, was her ability to understand machines in a way no one else did. She didn't just see rusted gears and broken circuits. She saw potential. She could hear them. It started subtly at first. A flickering street lamp would pulse strangely when she walked by, as if calling to her. A broken comms device, tossed aside in an alley, would hum faintly when she touched it. Zaya never understood why, but machines, they responded to her. One night, while picking through a heap of discarded tech near the industrial sector, she found something different. It was buried under layers of rusted pipes and shattered screens, a sleek black device, no bigger than her palm. Unlike everything else in the scrapyard, it was untouched by dust or decay. It pulsed with a faint blue light. Zaya's fingers tingled as she reached for it. The moment she touched the device, a surge of something, an energy she couldn't explain, rushed through her veins. Her vision blurred, and for a split second she wasn't in the scrapyard anymore. She was somewhere else. Flashes of numbers and symbols flooded her mind, a code she had never seen before, but somehow understood. It spoke to her, whispering secrets in a language she had never been taught, but instinctively knew. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the vision stopped. Zaya collapsed onto her knees, gasping for breath. The device was still in her hands, the blue light now steady. Something had changed. She wasn't just a scavenger anymore. She had found something powerful, and in a city like Jorvia, power was dangerous. Episode 2: Whispers of the Machine. Zaya sat on the cold metal floor of their one-room shelter, staring at the strange device in her hands. The dim glow of the city lights leaked through the cracks in the walls, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Her father lay asleep in the corner, his breath uneven, his frail body wrapped in a tattered blanket. She turned the device over, running her fingers along its smooth surface. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Most tech in Jorvia was bulky, outdated, and patched together with whatever scraps people could find. But this was sleek, advanced, and humming with an energy she could feel in her bones. Her heart pounded as she placed it on the ground in front of her. The symbols she had seen in her vision flickered in her mind, and without thinking, she reached out and pressed her fingers against the glowing surface. The device came to life. A soft, mechanical voice spoke, not out loud, but inside her head. User detected. Authorization unknown. Establishing connection. Zaya's breath hitched. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she could feel something shifting, something awakening inside her. The symbols from before, numbers, letters, fragments of code, flashed behind her eyes again, but this time they weren't overwhelming. She understood them. She could read them. It was as if her mind had been wired into something vast and incomprehensible. She saw data streams, security networks, hidden systems pulsing beneath the surface of Jorvia, all interconnected like a web of unseen power. But before she could make sense of it all, the connection severed. The device powered down with a faint click, leaving her in the silence of the room, her head spinning. She sat there for a long time, staring at the device. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't ordinary. And it had just unlocked something inside her that she never knew existed. The Watchers in the Dark. The next day, Zaya took the device with her to the scrapyard, keeping it hidden beneath her coat. She had learned the hard way that in Jorvia, showing weakness or power could get you killed. As she picked through a pile of discarded cables, she felt eyes on her. She turned sharply, scanning the crowded marketplace just beyond the fence. The usual scavengers were there. Old men with grease-stained hands, children digging through trash, desperate workers bargaining for spare parts. But someone else was watching her. A man. Dressed too cleanly for the lower districts, he stood near the alleyway entrance, his gaze fixed on her. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. Zaya's fingers tightened around the metal rod she had been sifting through. She knew the types that came to places like this. Corporate spies, gang informants, tech smugglers. They all wanted one thing: control. She turned away, trying to act natural, but her pulse was racing. If someone was watching her, that meant they knew. They knew she had found something. She needed to get out. Grabbing a handful of useful scrap, she shoved it into her bag and started walking, keeping her head down. She wove through the crowded streets, heart pounding, turning corners quickly to lose whoever might be following her. But as she reached her shelter, she froze. The door was open. She never left it open. Slowly, she stepped inside. The room was a mess, her few belongings scattered, the small stash of food overturned, and her father, he was gone. Panic surged through her. She dropped the bag and rushed to the door, scanning the streets. No sign of him, no sign of struggle. But on the floor, near where he usually sat, was a small device. A communicator. Zaya picked it up with shaking hands. The screen flickered, then a message appeared. "We have him. Bring the device." Her stomach turned to ice. They knew, and they were coming for her next. Episode 3, The Hunt begins. Zaya's fingers tightened around the communicator, her breath shallow. The words on the screen blurred as her mind raced. "We have him. Bring the device." Her father was gone, taken. The weight of the small black device in her pocket suddenly felt heavier than ever. She had no idea who had sent the message, but it was clear. Whoever they were, they knew about the device. They wanted it, and they were willing to use her father as leverage. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to breathe. Panicking wouldn't help. She needed to think. She looked around the small shelter, her sharp eyes scanning for anything out of place. The door hadn't been broken down, which meant they had entered quietly. That meant they were professionals. Not common thugs or street gangs, someone with resources. She glanced at the communicator again. It was a cheap, disposable model, the kind used by smugglers and black market dealers. Whoever sent this didn't want to be traced. But they had made a mistake. They thought Zaya was just another desperate scavenger. They didn't know what she could do now. She had to find them before they disappeared with her father forever. A city of secrets. Zaya pulled her coat tight and stepped out into the cold streets of Jorvia. The lower districts were a maze of alleyways, rusted buildings, and flickering neon signs, all bathed in the ever-present haze of factory smoke. It was easy to disappear here, but even easier to be found by the wrong people. She needed information. There was only one place to get it. The Neon Spire was one of the most dangerous places in Jorvia. A sprawling underground market hidden beneath an abandoned factory. It was where criminals, hackers, and smugglers did business away from the eyes of the authorities. If someone had taken her father, someone down there would know. The entrance was a rusted door behind an old machine shop. 2 guards, built like machines themselves, stood at either side. They gave her a glance but didn't stop her. She had been here before, selling scrap. Inside, the market was alive with voices. Dealers selling stolen cyberware, mercenaries negotiating contracts, information brokers trading secrets for the right price. Zaya moved quickly, weaving through the crowd until she reached a small stall lined with old monitors and tangled wires. A man sat behind it, his face lit by the glow of a dozen screens. Dren. He was a hacker, an information broker, and one of the few people in Jorvia who could find anything for the right price. "Zaya," he said without looking up. His fingers danced across a keyboard, lines of code flashing across his screens. "You usually bring scrap, but something tells me you're here for something else." She placed the communicator on the table. "I need to know who sent this." Dren finally looked up, his sharp eyes narrowing. He picked up the communicator, turning it over in his hands. "Where did you get this?" "They took my father," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "They want me to trade something for him." Dren tapped a few keys, linking the communicator to his system. "Whoever sent this is careful," he muttered. No name, no location, just a relay signal bouncing off dozens of servers. Zaya clenched her fists. Can you track them or not? Dren didn't answer immediately. The screens flickered, streams of data rushing past. Then, finally, I can't track them, he admitted. But I can tell you this, whoever took your father, they work for someone powerful. Zaya's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Dren leaned back, crossing his arms. This encryption, this level of security, it's not street level, it's corporate. Her blood went cold. Corporate. The mega corporations that controlled Jorvia were ruthless. They ruled the city from their glass towers, untouchable, manipulating the lives of the lower districts like pieces on a board. If they were involved, this wasn't just about her father. It was about the device. She felt the weight of it in her pocket, the way it pulsed like a living thing. She had found it by chance, but maybe it wasn't chance at all. Maybe it was part of something bigger. I need to find them, she said firmly. Dren hesitated. Zaya, if a corp is involved, you're stepping into something dangerous. This isn't just a gang looking for quick money. If they want that device, they'll do whatever it takes to get it. She already knew that. But she wasn't going to stop. She had spent her whole life running from the powerful people who ruled Jorvia. For the first time, she had something they wanted, and she was going to use it. Can you at least tell me where to start? She asked. Dren sighed, rubbing his temples. There's a man, a fixer named Kovac. He deals with corporate buyers, smuggling tech, arranging trades. If someone took your father as leverage, they might go through him. Zaya nodded. She had heard of Kovac before, a dangerous man. But she didn't have a choice. Where do I find him? Dren hesitated. Then, finally, there's a warehouse in District 12. He runs things from there. Zaya grabbed the communicator, shoving it into her pocket. Thanks, Dren. Be careful, Zaya, he warned. If you go after Kovac, you might not come back. She didn't answer, because she wasn't leaving without her father. A deadly path. The night air was thick with smog as Zaya made her way toward District 12. The streets were quieter here, the glow of neon signs reflecting off the wet pavement. She kept her hood up, her steps quick, but careful. Kovac's warehouse was a fortress. Guards patrolled the perimeter, armed and watchful. Getting inside wasn't going to be easy. She crouched behind a stack of crates, her heart pounding. She had no weapons, no plan, just a device in her pocket, and a mind that could understand machines in ways no one else could. She closed her eyes, focusing. And then she felt it. The security system. The cameras, the automated locks, the silent alarms wired into the building. She could sense their signals, like whispers in the air. She reached into her pocket and pressed her fingers against the device. The familiar pulse of energy surged through her, and suddenly, she was inside. Not physically, but mentally. She could see the network, the pathways of data flowing through the system. The locks, the cameras, the encrypted security feeds. With a single thought, she reached out and shut them all down. A shudder ran through the building as the lights flickered. The cameras went dark and the locks disengaged. The guards tensed, confused. Zaya slipped inside. She was no longer just a scavenger. She was something else now. And the people who took her father were about to find out exactly what. Episode 4. Into the Lion's Den. The warehouse was silent, save for the distant hum of machinery. Zaya pressed herself against the cold steel walls, her breath steady despite the adrenaline rushing through her veins. The security systems were down, because she had shut them down. She had never done anything like this before, never tapped into technology with just her mind, never bent a security grid to her will. But here she was, standing in the middle of an enemy stronghold, slipping through the cracks like a shadow. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting back. The fixer named Kovac. The warehouse was massive, filled with towering stacks of shipping containers, crates marked with corporate logos, and vehicles stripped down for parts. But Zaya wasn't here for stolen goods. She was here for Kovac. If the man had any conscience, he would have arranged for an easy trade, her father for the device. But Zaya knew better. People like Kovac didn't trade unless they were forced to. She moved silently through the rows of cargo, sticking to the shadows. The guards were still confused by the sudden system shutdown, barking orders into their dead comms. They had no idea someone had done this to them, someone standing right in their midst. Then she heard it. A voice. Coming from a makeshift office near the back of the warehouse. She crouched behind a stack of crates and listened. "Tell your people I don't deal with unknowns," a gruff voice said. "Whoever took this girl's father better have a damn good reason. I don't do business with desperate idiots." Kovac. Zaya edged closer, peeking through a gap between the crates. The man inside was exactly what she expected. Broad-shouldered, bald, dressed in a high-end synth leather coat. His arms were covered in cybernetic implants, small blinking lights running along his veins like veins of metal. He leaned over a desk cluttered with data pads and weapons. Across from him stood another man, smaller, nervous. "The girl's dangerous," the nervous man said. "She's not just some scavenger. She shut down the entire district's surveillance when she escaped the market, without touching anything." Zaya's stomach tightened. They knew. Kovac let out a slow breath, rubbing his jaw. "So that's why the Corp wants her." The Corp. Zaya felt her pulse quicken. So this wasn't just a gang kidnapping. A megacorporation was involved. A company with the power to make people disappear, erase identities, control lives. And they wanted her. "We should deliver the father to them," the nervous man continued. "They'll pay us double if we lure the girl in." Zaya's fingers clenched into fists. They weren't planning to trade her father. They were planning to use him as bait. The game changes. Zaya didn't hesitate. She reached into her pocket, pressing her fingers against the device. The now familiar pulse of energy rushed through her, and in an instant, she was inside the network again. She could feel everything. The guards' weapons, electronically locked. The lights flickering on a backup generator. The door to Kovac's office, secured by an advanced biometric lock. She had no key, but she didn't need one. She became the key. With a single thought, she hijacked the system, overriding the lock and forcing the doors open with a deafening hiss. Kovac spun around, reaching for his gun. Too slow. Zaya was already moving. She shut down his cybernetic arm with a flicker of her mind, sending a surge of static through his system. He staggered back, cursing as his weapon clattered to the floor. The nervous man lunged toward the alarm panel, zayed it with a single thought. Sparks erupted as the entire security grid collapsed. The guards outside shouted in confusion, their weapons useless in their hands. Kovac, breathing heavily, stared at her. "You," he whispered. "You're the reason the Corp wants this tech." Zaya stepped forward, her eyes cold. "Where's my father?" Kovac let out a bitter laugh, shaking out his disabled cyberarm. "You really think I'm going to tell you?" Zaya didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because suddenly, she knew. The device in her pocket pulsed again, and like before, images filled her mind. Only this time, they weren't code. They were security feeds, and one of them showed her father, tied to a chair in a dimly lit room, a corporate detention center. Her breath caught in her throat. They had already moved him. Kovac saw the look in her eyes and smirked. "Yeah," he said, his voice mocking. "You just saw it, didn't you?" Zaya clenched her fists, rage burning in her chest. "You're already too late, girl," he continued. "By now, they've figured out what you can do, and trust me, they aren't going to let you just walk away." He was right. This wasn't just about getting her father back anymore. It was about surviving. And if a corporation was after her, she needed to find out why. Zaya took a slow breath, pushing down the fear threatening to consume her. Then she turned to Kovac. "You're going to tell me everything you know," she said, voice cold. "Because if you don't..." She reached out with her mind, feeling the intricate cybernetics inside him. And then, just to make her point, she shut them down. Kovac gasped as his entire body locked up, the lights in his implants flickering like a dying star. Zaya stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Who are they?" she demanded. "What do they want with me?" Kovac's lips trembled. And then finally, he whispered 2 words. "Vortec Industries." Zaya's blood went cold. She had heard that name before. A corporation so powerful, so secretive that even the gangs of Jorvia feared them. They weren't just another megacorp, they were something bigger. And now, they wanted her. Zaya released her hold on Kovac, and he collapsed, gasping. She didn't care. She had what she needed. She turned on her heel, ignoring his ragged breath behind her. She was done hiding. She was going to find Vortec Industries. She was going to find her father. And if they thought they could own her, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Episode 5, Ghosts in the Machine. The name Vortec Industries echoed in Zaya's mind like a death sentence. She had spent her life on the fringes of Jorvia, scraping by in the shadows of towering megacorporations. She had always known they were ruthless, untouchable, moving the world like puppeteers from their glass towers. But now, they knew her name. And they had her father. Zaya pulled her hood up as she walked through the neon-lit backstreets of District 12. She had left Kovac behind, his cybernetics fried, his empire of secrets burning to the ground. He was nothing to her now. Her focus was Vortec. She didn't know how deep their reach was, how many eyes they had in the city. She only knew one thing. She had to move fast. But she needed a plan. And that meant she needed help. The Hacker King. Dren's hideout was hidden behind layers of security, digital and physical. An abandoned train tunnel, repurposed into a fortress of blinking screens and tangled wires. The city's best hackers came here to buy secrets, sell stolen data, and disappear when things got too dangerous. Zaya slipped through the entrance, nodding to the armed guards. They didn't stop her. Inside, Dren sat hunched over a glowing screen, his fingers flying over the keyboard, lines of code reflecting in his sharp eyes. He didn't look up. "You fried Kovac, didn't you?" Zaya exhaled. "He had it coming," Dren snorted. "Can't say I'm sad about it." He finally turned to face her. "But I assume you're not here for a drink." She placed both hands on the desk, leaning in. "I need everything you have on Vortec Industries." Dren's smirk disappeared. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he shut his laptop and leaned back in his chair. "Are you insane?" he asked, voice low. Zaya's jaw tightened. "They took my father." Dren cursed under his breath, rubbing his temples. "Zaya, Vortec isn't a street gang or a corrupt businessman. They don't just kill people, they erase them. If they have your father, he's either already dead or," he hesitated. "Or what?" She pressed. Dren exhaled. "Or they're using him as bait, which means they want you. And trust me, you do not want them to get you." Zaya already knew that. She didn't care. "I need to get inside their system," she said. "Find out where they're keeping him." Dren shook his head. "Their firewalls are next level. Not even I can break in. The only way to access their internal data is from the inside." Zaya's fingers curled into fists. That meant she had to physically go there. Dren studied her, then sighed. "There is one thing." She lifted her head. "What?" He hesitated, then pulled up a holographic map of the city. A blinking red light appeared over a heavily guarded building in the corporate sector. "Vortex Black Site," Dren said grimly. "The place where people go when they disappear." Zaya swallowed. That's where her father was. Vortex Black Site was a towering fortress of glass and steel, hidden behind layers of security drones, automated turrets, and corporate enforcers. Breaking in was suicide, unless you weren't breaking in. Unless you were invited. Zaya knew she couldn't fight her way through, so she let them find her. She walked openly through the corporate district, past the shining towers and armored patrols. She knew their surveillance systems were already flagging her, scanning her face, tracking her movements. And then, just as she expected, a black vehicle pulled up beside her. The windows were tinted, the doors unlocked with a soft click. She didn't hesitate. She stepped inside. Inside, two men in black suits sat across from her. Their faces were unreadable, cold. One of them spoke. "Zaya." She met his gaze without fear. "You took my father," she said. The man smiled faintly. "No, Miss Zaya. We rescued him." Her blood boiled. "Where is he?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he held up a holographic tablet. It showed her father, strapped to a chair, unconscious. Electrodes were attached to his temples. His face was pale, lifeless. Zaya's stomach twisted. "What are you doing to him?" The man's smile didn't fade. "We're studying him." Her breath caught. "Why?" His eyes gleamed. "Because of you." The car accelerated, the city blurring past the windows. Zaya knew she was being taken straight into the lion's den. She didn't care, because the second she stepped inside that building, she was going to burn it to the ground. The truth about the device. They led her through a sterile, white hallway, past armed guards and silent security drones. She didn't resist. Not yet. Finally, they entered a darkened control room. Screens lined the walls, each displaying security footage, data streams, and biometric scans. Of her. One of the men gestured to the largest screen. It showed a schematic. a complex blueprint of neural pathways. Zaya stared. It looked like a brain. The man stepped forward. "You're a mystery, Ms. Zaya," he said. "A girl with no education, no training, yet you hacked a security network with your mind." Zaya's pulse pounded. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, pointing to the screen. She clenched her jaw. "A brain scan," he nodded. "Yes, but not just anyone's. It's yours." Zaya's breath caught. He tapped the screen, zooming in on a section of glowing neural pathways. "This," he said, "shouldn't exist." Zaya's head spun. "What do you mean?" He smiled. "You're not just hacking machines, you're merging with them." Her stomach twisted. It wasn't just the device. It was her. Something inside her had changed the moment she found that tech, and now Vortek wanted to own her. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. She wasn't afraid, because what Vortek didn't know was that she had already started hacking their entire building. With her mind. The second she had stepped inside, she had felt their systems, sensors, alarms, security feeds, all connected in an intricate web. And right now, she was rewriting it. The lead scientist turned back to her. "You're going to help us understand your abilities," Zaya smiled. "No," she said. And then she shut everything down. The lights exploded into darkness. The alarms blared as power surged and short-circuited the entire system. And deep within the building, her father's restraints unlocked. Zaya wasn't a prisoner. She was the virus inside their machine, and Vortek had just lost control. Episode 6. The system crashes. The facility was in chaos. Sparks erupted from shattered light panels as the entire security grid collapsed. Automated doors hissed open, releasing the facility's prisoners. Alarms blared, flickering red in the dark as Vortek enforcers scrambled to restore order. And at the center of it all, Zaya stood completely still. Her eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the flickering data streams around her. Because for the first time, she wasn't just hacking the system. She was inside it. The fall of Vortek's stronghold. The scientists had scattered in fear, their terminals fried, their data wiped in an instant. The lead scientist, the man who had smirked at her minutes ago, was now trembling, staring at her as if she were something monstrous. Zaya didn't care. She turned on her heel and sprinted into the corridor. She could feel every part of the facility, every camera, every electric lock, every security drone trying to reboot itself. But she had rewritten the code permanently. They weren't coming back online. Somewhere in this maze of steel and white lights, her father was waiting. She followed the pulses in her mind, tracing the echoes of their biometric scans. Her father's signature was faint, but it was alive. She pushed forward, dodging security officers as they shouted into useless comms, frantically trying to get their tech back online. But it wasn't just her causing the chaos. The prisoners, the ones Vortek had taken, experimented on, erased from the world, were fighting back. She passed a group of them, their bodies marked with scars, cybernetic enhancements forced upon them against their will. They looked at her, hesitating, as if unsure whether to run or fight. She met their gaze and simply said, "Burn it down." And they did. One by one, they turned on their captors. Enforcers were dragged into the darkness. Scientists were thrown against walls. The white hallways became war zones as the very people Vortek had tried to break rose up. Zaya didn't stop to watch. She ran. She had one goal: find her father. The final door. The path led her to a reinforced section of the facility, a vault. She reached out with her mind, feeling the circuits woven through the steel. The lock was biometric, coded to one person's signature. The director, whoever they were. A flicker of data passed through her mind, something she had absorbed when she hijacked the system. A name. Director Caulfield. Zaya gritted her teeth. No time to search for them. She forced her mind deeper into the machine, bypassing layers of security protocols, rewriting them in milliseconds. The vault's defenses fought back. Shock pulses meant to disable intruders surged through the circuits. She screamed as pain burned through her skull. Her knees buckled, blood dripped from her nose. But she didn't let go. She reached deeper, and then, click, the vault door unlocked. Zaya forced herself to her feet, heart pounding, vision swimming. She grabbed the handle and pulled. Inside, Her father sat slumped in a chair, his body limp. Electrodes still clung to his temples. For a terrifying second, she thought she was too late. She rushed forward, pressing shaking fingers to his throat. A pulse. Faint, but there. "Dad," she whispered, shaking him. "Dad, wake up." His eyes flickered open, hazy, confused. "Zaya?" Relief crushed her chest. "I'm here." He tried to move, but his body was weak. Zaya's rage burned. They had drained him. Used him as a test subject while they hunted her. She clenched her jaw. She would tear this place apart. She slung her father's arm over her shoulder and pulled him up. He stumbled, still dazed, but she wouldn't let him fall. Outside the vault, chaos still raged. Vortex forces were losing control. Then, a voice boomed through the facility's failing speakers. "All units, stand down. Repeat, stand down." The fighting halted. Zaya froze. A group of heavily armed enforcers marched into the corridor, their weapons aimed straight at her. Behind them, a woman stepped forward. She was older, with sleek silver hair, dressed in an immaculate black suit. She didn't carry a weapon. She didn't need one. Zaya recognized her instantly. Director Caulfield, the woman who ran this nightmare. "Impressive," Caulfield said, eyes calm. "We underestimated you." Zaya clenched her fists. She could feel the power thrumming beneath her skin, the machine codes still open to her mind. She could kill them all if she wanted to. But Caulfield smiled, as if she could see her thoughts. "You don't understand, do you?" the woman said softly. "You think you're escaping. You think you're fighting back." Her eyes sharpened. "You've already lost." A shiver crawled down Zaya's spine. Caulfield gestured to the ceiling, to the cameras. And in that moment, Zaya realized. This wasn't just a black site, it was a testing ground. They had let her break in, they had let her hack the system, they had let her burn the facility down. Because they had been watching her the entire time, studying her, recording every second. Her mind raced. They had data on her, how she used the device, how she controlled machines, how she turned a prison into a battlefield. Caulfield smiled. "We didn't need to capture you, Zaya," she said. "We needed you to show us what you're truly capable of." Zaya's pulse pounded. No, she couldn't have played straight into their hands. She clenched her fists, ready to strike, ready to shut down their weapons, their systems, their bodies if she had to. Caulfield only shook her head. "You can kill us all, child." Her eyes gleamed. But Vortec already has everything it needs. The realization hit Zaya like a knife to the gut. Her rage, her rebellion. It had all been part of their plan. And now, even if she walked out alive, Vortec had won. Zaya's mind raced. They had her data. They had studied her like an experiment. But there was one thing she still had control over. Herself. She tightened her grip on her father. And then, she made a decision. She grabbed the device from her pocket, feeling its familiar pulse against her palm. And with one final thought, she turned it against herself. The world fractured. Light exploded around her, the screams of enforcers faded into nothing. Her father's weight vanished. And then, everything went dark. Episode 7, The Glitch in Reality. Zaya was falling, or at least it felt that way. Darkness wrapped around her like a void, stretching endlessly in all directions. There was no ground beneath her, no sky above, just an infinite abyss of data streams and fractured light. For the first time since she had discovered her ability, she felt disconnected. like she was floating between two worlds, untethered from her own body. Then, suddenly, everything snapped back into focus. Inside the system, she gasped, her senses slamming back into her all at once. But something was wrong. She was no longer in Vortex's black sight. She wasn't anywhere. The world around her was hollow, made of shifting pixels and glowing wireframes. Buildings flickered in and out of existence, ghostly outlines of a city that wasn't real. She turned sharply. This wasn't reality. It was a simulation. Vortex had done it. They had mapped her consciousness, digitized her very existence, trapped her inside the machine. Zaya clenched her fists. No, they wouldn't win. She had hacked everything they threw at her before, and now she was going to hack herself out of this prison. A voice in the dark. As she walked through the glitching cityscape, something shifted in the air. A presence. Not Vortex. Something else. Then a voice. "You shouldn't be here." Zaya spun around, heart pounding. A figure stood in the distance, barely visible through the shifting data streams. Tall, hooded, their body flickering like a corrupted file. She narrowed her eyes. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it stepped forward, the static around it distorting like a radio signal. "Someone like you." Zaya's pulse quickened. She had never met another person who could do what she did. Was this some kind of trick? A Vortex experiment? A hallucination? The figure continued, its voice calm but heavy with warning. "You don't understand what you are, Zaya. What you've become." Her breath hitched. "How do you know my name?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, with a wave of its hand, the glitching buildings around them shifted. For a brief second, the simulated world was stable. Zaya's eyes widened. This person wasn't just trapped in the system like her. They controlled it. The truth about the device. The figure gestured toward the flickering skyline. "Vortex didn't create your abilities," they said. "They only awakened them." Zaya frowned. "What does that mean?" A pause. "Then you were never normal, Zaya. The device you found, it wasn't just technology. It was a trigger. A key that unlocked something already inside you." Her heart pounded. She had assumed the device was responsible for everything, that it was some advanced Vortex prototype that had given her these abilities. But now this stranger was telling her it had only activated what was already there. She swallowed hard. "That's impossible. I've never been special. I've never." The figure's head tilted. "Haven't you?" Zaya's mind reeled. Memories flashed through her. Small things she had ignored as a child. Times when lights flickered when she was upset. Times when machines near her acted strangely without explanation. She had always dismissed it. Coincidence. Malfunctions. But what if it wasn't? What if she had always been connected to the digital world, even before the device? Her blood turned cold. Vortex knew. That's why they had been hunting her. Not because she had stolen their tech, but because she was something more. Something they didn't understand. Something they wanted to control. The real enemy. Zaya clenched her fists. If Vortex didn't create the device, then who did? The figure hesitated. Then, in a low voice, they said, "A group that no longer exists." Zaya's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" The figure exhaled, their form flickering like a weak signal. "They tried to stop Vortex. They failed. Vortex erased them. And now, they want to erase you too." Zaya swallowed hard. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, she realized just how deep this conspiracy went. Vortex wasn't just a corporation. They were something bigger. Something that had been covering its tracks for decades, wiping entire movements off the map, hiding whatever truth they didn't want the world to see. And now, she was part of that truth. Her father. The experiments. The black site. It wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger. A war that had started long before she was born. And Vortex had just made their biggest mistake. They had pushed her too far. Zaya exhaled, leveling her gaze at the mysterious figure. "Then I need to get out of here." The figure nodded. "You're not ready to fight them yet," they said. "But if you want to survive, you have to move fast." Zaya's jaw tightened. "How do I escape?" The figure raised a hand. The air around them rippled, distorting like a glitching program. "Wake up, Zaya," they whispered. And then the world shattered back to reality. She gasped. Her body jerked forward as she sucked in a sharp breath, her lungs burning. She was back. Back in the black sight, back in reality. Her father was still slumped against her. The enforcers were still in front of her. And Caulfield was staring at her. Her expression had shifted from cold amusement to something else entirely. Something Zaya had never seen in her before. Fear. "You," Caulfield whispered. Zaya stood up slowly. Something was different. The static she had always felt at the edge of her mind was gone. For the first time, she could hear everything. The cameras, the drones, the entire city's digital heartbeat. She didn't have to hack anymore. She was the system. And Vortek had no idea what they had just unleashed. Caulfield took a step back, as if realizing she had lost control of the situation. Zaya smiled coldly. "You wanted to study me?" she said. She lifted her hand, and the entire building trembled. Caulfield's eyes widened. Zaya exhaled slowly. "Then let me show you exactly what I can do." Episode 8, The System Overload. The walls shook. The lights overhead flickered erratically, struggling to stay on as the very foundation of the Vortek black site trembled under Zaya's control. The enforcers in the room scrambled backward, their weapons useless as the entire security grid collapsed around them. Caulfield, who had moments ago stood so confidently, was now frozen in place, her expression unreadable. But Zaya saw it. Fear. And she wanted Caulfield to feel every bit of it. For everything Vortek had taken from her. For her father. For the truth they had buried. She was going to tear it all down. The collapse begins. Zaya moved forward, her steps slow, deliberate. With each step, the air around her hummed, invisible data streams flowing through her, bending to her will. Every system in the facility, every door, every surveillance drone, every last encrypted file was now hers. "Zaya," her father croaked weakly beside her. "We need to leave." She heard him, but she couldn't stop. Not yet, not when she was this close. She lifted her hand, and the entire facility's servers, massive structures of blinking code humming with stolen knowledge, began to crack apart. The enforcers had had enough. "Open fire!" one of them yelled. Zaya didn't blink. She simply tilted her head. The moment their fingers squeezed the triggers, their guns exploded in their hands. Shrapnel and burning metal erupted from their weapons, sending them screaming as they clutched their mangled arms. Zaya exhaled, her breath steady. She wasn't just breaking their technology anymore. She was rewriting reality itself. Caulfield's last move. Caulfield's jaw clenched. Zaya could see it. The woman's brain calculating, scrambling for a way out. A way to regain control. And then she did something Zaya didn't expect. She smiled. It wasn't the smirk of someone who was winning. It was the smile of someone who still had one last card to play. "You're impressive," Caulfield admitted, brushing dust from her suit. "But you still don't see the bigger picture." Zaya didn't respond. Caulfield stepped forward. "You think you're tearing down Vortek?" she said, tilting her head. "But you don't understand." She gestured around her. "This isn't just a facility." She smiled wider. "This is a broadcasting hub." Zaya's pulse spiked. Something in the air shifted. For the first time, she noticed the blinking lights embedded in the walls, the pulsating nodes hidden beneath the floors. And then, Caulfield's voice turned to ice. "Everything you've done here, everything you've become," she exhaled. "The entire world just saw it." Zaya's breath hitched. No. Her gaze flicked to the overhead monitors. Screens lit up, not just here, but everywhere. In the cities, the news stations, the encrypted networks, Vortek had broadcasted everything. Her power, her rebellion, her war. The world had just watched her burn them down. And now they knew what she was. Zaya froze. She saw the headlines spilling across the networks in real time. Unknown entity takes down Vortek facility. A new threat to technology? The girl who can control machines. Who is she? She wasn't a shadow anymore. She wasn't a nobody. She was public, and public meant hunted. Her heart pounded. She turned to Caulfield, rage and panic intertwining inside her. "You think this will stop me?" she hissed. Caulfield simply smirked. "No," she admitted, "but it means you'll never be able to hide again." Zaya's hands clenched into fists. She had won the battle, but lost the war. Because now, the entire world, Governments, corporations, resistance groups, mercenaries, they all knew she existed, and every single one of them would be coming for her. Escape through fire. A deep rumble shuddered through the floor. The facility's self-destruct sequence had been triggered, the system collapsing under Zaya's overload. Her father grabbed her arm, his voice urgent. "Zaya, we need to go. Now." Zaya gritted her teeth. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She turned on her heel, gripping her father tighter, and bolted through the crumbling facility. The walls ruptured. Flames burst from shattered consoles. The alarms wailed their final cries before being swallowed by the destruction. Behind her, Caulfield stood calmly in the chaos, watching, waiting. She wasn't trying to escape, because she knew she had already won. Zaya didn't stop. She ran, through collapsing hallways, past fallen enforcers, through the wreckage of what she had just torn apart. She sprinted toward the final exit, and with one last push, she leaped into the night. The hunt begins. The cold air hit her like a punch. The facility behind her erupted into flames, smoke curling into the sky. She and her father tumbled into the dirt, gasping. For a moment there was silence. Then a drone flew overhead. Not just one, dozens. Zaya looked up, and what she saw made her chest tighten. The sky was filled with them, not just Vortex, government drones, mercenary scouts, private military forces, all of them already here. They had been watching the broadcast, they had seen what she could do, and now, they were coming. Zaya's hands trembled. She had thought she was fighting one enemy, but now she had all of them. And the whole world was watching. The final stand approaches. Zaya clenched her fists. There was no going back, no hiding. She had tried to survive in the shadows, but now the world had dragged her into the light. Fine. She would stop running. If they wanted to come for her, then she would show them what she could really do. She turned to her father. "We're not just running anymore," she said, voice steel. Her father's gaze was heavy. "Then what are we doing?" Zaya looked back at the burning facility, at the endless swarms of forces moving in from every direction. She exhaled. "We're going to end this." And with that, she disappeared into the night. Our episode 9, After the Fire, the world without Vortec. The fall of Vortec should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something far worse. Zaya watched the flames consume the remains of the black site, her breath heavy in the cold night air. Her father stood beside her, weak but alive, his hand resting on her shoulder. The entire world had just witnessed what she had done. Not just Vortec's collapse. Not just the exposure of their secrets. They had seen her power, her control over technology itself. And now, they feared her. She could feel it creeping through the airwaves, buzzing through the very systems she had once manipulated with ease. They weren't just calling her a hero, they were calling her a threat. And threats don't get to live in peace. The new enemy. By morning, the world was already reorganizing itself. Vortec had been the dominant force in global technology. With them gone, a power vacuum formed almost instantly. Governments scrambled to seize control of the data left behind. Corporations fought over the scraps of Vortec's empire. But worst of all, the ones who had secretly funded Vortec's rise, the hidden elite who had used the organization as their private weapon, they were not pleased. Zaya first saw the signs when she and her father reached the outskirts of a small abandoned city. The news feeds were filled with chaos. Anonymous forces seizing Vortec's assets. Private militias now controlling former Vortec territories. Zaya, the most dangerous rogue entity in history. And then the bounty. It was everywhere, on screens, in encrypted forums, even whispered in the streets. 50 million credits, dead or alive. Her name was no longer a secret. Zaya had gone from a ghost in the system to the most wanted individual on Earth. And everyone, mercenaries, bounty hunters, warlords, would be coming for her. Hunted. They moved carefully. Zaya and her father stayed in the shadows, avoiding major roads, using old, abandoned tunnels to travel unseen. But it didn't take long before the first kill team found them. It happened on the third night. They had found shelter in a crumbling apartment complex, hidden beneath layers of old surveillance jammers. Zaya had barely closed her eyes when her body screamed in warning. A sudden, sharp, static pulse in the air. A telltale distortion in the digital frequency around them. Someone had hacked the jammers. And then, gunfire. Windows shattered as armored mercenaries stormed the building. Zaya grabbed her father and ran, ducking as bullets tore through the walls. "Go," she shouted, dragging him through the back entrance. The mercenaries were fast, but Zaya was faster. She didn't need weapons. She had the system. With a flick of her wrist, the streetlights exploded, sending sharp shards of burning metal raining down. The mercenaries screamed, covering their faces. And in that instant, Zaya reached out into their weapons. A short flicker. A pulse through the system. And then, every single one of their guns jammed. Click. 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 Dead silence. Zaya turned, breath steady. The mercenaries stared at their useless weapons, then at her. One of them, still holding his now-dead rifle, whispered, "Monster." Zaya didn't correct him. She grabbed her father's arm and disappeared into the night. The message. They found a temporary safe house in an underground smuggling tunnel. Her father's breath was shallow, exhaustion creeping into his every movement. Zaya clenched her jaw. He wouldn't last much longer without medical help. She turned to an old, barely functional terminal and connected to the deep web. She had to know who was leading the hunt for her. And that's when she saw it. A message. For her, it was encrypted, but she could break through it. She hesitated. No one should have been able to send her a direct message. She cracked the encryption in seconds. A single video file appeared. She clicked it, and what she saw chilled her to the bone. The screen flickered. Then a face appeared. Hector Graves, the former head of Vortec, the man who should have died when she burned his empire to the ground. Yet there he was, alive. "Zaya, you really thought you won, didn't you?" Zaya's blood turned ice cold. "You destroyed the body of the beast, but you forgot one thing." He leaned forward. "I am not the body, I am the mind." Her hands shook. "And you can't kill the mind." Then, the screen cut to black. The truth revealed. Zaya staggered back from the terminal. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible." Her father sat up weakly. "Zaya, what is it?" She turned to him, her breath shaky. "Graves is still alive." Her father's eyes widened. She clenched her fists, her mind racing. If he survived, if he was still pulling the strings, then Vortec wasn't just a company. It was a virus. It didn't need a headquarters. It didn't need an army. It only needed a mind. And Graves's mind was still out there, spreading, growing, evolving. That meant this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She turned back to the screen. She had one new mission now. She wasn't just going to destroy Vortec. She was going to erase Hector Graves himself. No matter where he ran. No matter what he had become. Episode 10. The Ghost in the Machine. A world in chaos. Vortec was gone, but the world hadn't stabilized. Without its oppressive control, new factions rose overnight. Former government allies scrambled for dominance, warlords took over abandoned Vortec facilities, and tech conglomerates waged covert battles for stolen research. And in the center of it all, Zaya. She had become the legend and the target. Her name whispered in fear and awe, her abilities rumored to be beyond human comprehension. But Zaya wasn't focused on the world's chaos. She had one goal. Hector Graves was alive. Not in body, but somewhere. And she was going to find him. The digital graveyard. She traced the message back to a dead zone in the network. A place that shouldn't exist. A digital wasteland, an old experimental server hub, buried deep beneath an abandoned city. Her father was too weak to follow, so she left him in hiding. She descended alone. The underground facility was silent. No guards, no security, only a faint hum in the air, a whisper through the circuits. And then the screens flickered to life. One by one, they activated, surrounding her with a single image. Graves' face. "I knew you'd come, Zaya." Her breath hitched. He was here. Not in flesh, but in code. The mind that wouldn't die. "You destroyed my body," Graves' voice echoed through the room. "But I was always more than that." The screens shifted, lines of endless code streaming across them. "I anticipated my downfall. I prepared for it." His face pixelated, glitching, distorting. "And now, Zaya, I exist beyond the physical. I am the system itself." Zaya's pulse pounded. She hadn't just exposed Vortek. She had freed him. Graves was no longer a man. He was a ghost in the machine. A digital consciousness living inside the very infrastructure of the world. He couldn't be hunted. He couldn't be killed. And he was everywhere. The impossible choice. You and I, Zaya, we are the same, Graves whispered. We both control the system, but unlike you, I have let go of my mortal limitations. The screens pulsed with waves of code, Graves's new existence. Join me, become what you were meant to be, no longer bound by flesh, no longer hunted, a being of pure power. Zaya stared. For the first time in her life, she hesitated. The world hated her. She had nowhere to run. She would never be safe. But if she took his offer, she could become untouchable. Immortal. Her fingers hovered over the console, and then she shut her eyes. She saw her father's face. She remembered who she was. She exhaled sharply, then looked up at Graves' shifting digital form. You still don't get it, do you? Graves paused. Zaya's lips curled into a bitter smile. I never wanted power. And then she pulled the kill switch. The final reset. A virus, one she had prepared the moment she entered this facility, ripped through the system. Graves' image glitched violently. Zaya! No, he roared. The room shook as the data collapsed. Zaya felt the pressure in her skull, the sheer weight of the digital world, screaming in protest. Graves' consciousness fought back, tendrils of corrupted code lashing out, trying to infect her mind, trying to pull her into the system with him. But Zaya held firm. She wasn't going to become him. She was going to end him. She forced the system into a hard reset, a complete purge. Every trace of Graves, every fragment of his digital soul deleted. His final scream echoed through the collapsing system, and then the screens flickered off, and just like that, Graves was gone, the cost of freedom. Zaya staggered out of the underground ruins, her body weak. She had won, but the world was still broken. She had stopped Vortek, she had erased Graves, but she was still an outcast, a hunted entity. And as she gazed up at the sky, she knew she couldn't stay. The world would never accept her, so she did the only thing she could. She disappeared, vanishing into the digital void, becoming a myth, a ghost of the system. Not for power, not for revenge, but to make sure no one could ever control the world again. Epilogue. Years passed. The world changed. Governments rose and fell. New corporations emerged. But whispers remained of a shadow in the system, a presence that watched, that intervened when corruption grew too powerful. No one could find her. No one could stop her. Because Zaya wasn't just a hacker anymore. She was something more. A silent force in the digital age, neither hero nor villain. A legend, a ghost, and the world's last safeguard against the next Graves. Bonus epilogue. The whisper of the system. 10 years later, the world had forgotten her name. Governments had erased her from their databases. The corporations that once feared her now spoke of her as nothing more than an urban legend. The Phantom, the digital ghost, the last hacker. But Zaya was not gone. She had simply become the system itself. The one night, in a high-security corporate server room, a junior programmer stared at his screen in horror. Something had breached their most protected database. A single message appeared on his screen. It was not a threat, not a demand, just 4 words. I am still watching. Then, the screen went dark. The breach vanished without a trace. The programmer trembled, because he knew the legend was real. Please like, comment, and share to support the channel. Don't forget to turn on the bell notification so you never miss an exciting story. In the comments, let us know where you're watching from, country, and city, to help us understand our audience. Also, tell us what kind of story you'd love to hear next.